All right, we are about to dive into what is, without a doubt, the single most chaotic week in stock market history. And look, this isn't just some story about numbers flying around on a screen. No, this is a tale of corporate warfare, of secret alliances, and the absolutely unbelievable moment a pretty boring car manufacturer became, just for a brief, mind-bending time, the most valuable company on the entire planet. Let's get into it.
This one quote, it just perfectly captures what we're talking about. Some of the smartest financial minds on earth, people managing billions of dollars for these powerful hedge funds, they just walked straight into a meticulously planned ambush. They were so sure, so absolutely convinced that they were the predators, but in reality, they were the prey. This wasn't just a bad trade. It was a catastrophic miscalculation that literally vaporized fortunes overnight.
So to really get how insane this all was, you have to rewind the clock to October 2008. The world was in a state of just absolute panic. The entire global financial system wasn't just on the edge, it was actively falling apart. Lehman Brothers, an institution that seemed like it would be there forever, had just collapsed. That sent shockwaves through every market on the globe. Confidence was gone. Credit markets were frozen solid. It was against this backdrop of pure chaos that something utterly impossible happened.
So this is our starting line. Volkswagen, or VW, was trading right around €200 a share. And honestly, that made total sense. They were a solid, if kind of boring, German car company. They made sensible cars like the Golf and the Passat. It was a stable, predictable stock for a stable, predictable company. Nothing here suggested a rocket was about to take off.
And then this happened. We're talking in a matter of hours. The stock didn't just, double or triple. It went completely supernova. It exploded upwards to over €1,000 a share. Now, this wasn't some gradual climb. It was a violent, instantaneous surge that just defied all logic, all reason, all financial gravity. You can just picture traders staring at their screens thinking, this has to be a glitch, right? Nope, it was real.
And this chart just brilliantly shows you the sheer absurdity of it all. For one brief, shining moment, Volkswagen became the most valuable company on planet Earth. Its market value soared past giants like ExxonMobil, the world's biggest oil company, and even a fast-growing Apple. A German car maker, in the middle of a global recession when nobody was buying cars, was suddenly worth more than anyone. How? Why? Well, to understand that, we need to understand the trap. Every great trap needs bait. And in this story, the bait was Volkswagen itself. If you were sitting on a trading floor in London or New York and looking in from the outside, it looked like the perfect target for sophisticated investors who were looking to make a killing in a downturn.
Yeah, the smart money, they looked at Volkswagen and they saw a dinosaur. They saw this bloated company with powerful unions that made it really inefficient. They saw these complex operations that just couldn't adapt. And crucially, they saw a company carrying way too much debt. In the middle of a financial crisis, when car sales are about to fall off a cliff, betting against a company like this, it seemed like the easiest, most obvious trade in the world. They figured it was time to put this dinosaur out of its misery. So the weapon they chose for this was called short selling. This is the financial tool they use to place their bets on Volkswagen's failure. It's a really common strategy if you want to profit from a falling price. But it carries a hidden, and as they were about to find out, a potentially infinite risk.
Okay, let's make this super simple, because this concept is key. Imagine you borrow your friend's car. You immediately sell it for, say, $10,000. So now, you don't have the car, but you've got 10 grand in cash. You've promised your friend you'll buy them an identical car and give it back next week. Your whole bet, your entire hope, is that by next week, the price of that exact car model has dropped to maybe $5,000. You buy it back for 5 grand, give it to your friend, and you just pocketed a cool $5,000 profit. Simple, right? But here's the crucial question. What happens if you're wrong? What if the price of that car doesn't go down? What if it jumps to $20,000 or $50,000 or $100,000? Well, you still have to buy that car back for your friend no matter what it costs. Your potential loss isn't limited. It's theoretically infinite. This is the razor's edge every short seller lives on. And this number tells you just how confident those hedge funds were. By October 2008, a massive 12.8% of all of Volkswagen's shares had been sold short. To put that in perspective, for a big blue-chip company like this, that is a colossal bet. This was a multi-billion-dollar wager from the biggest players in finance, all screaming at the same time that VW stock was going to crash. So the hedge funds, they saw themselves as these sharks, just circling what they thought was a wounded whale. They could smell blood in the water and they were getting ready to feast. But their intense focus on their target completely blinded them.
They didn't see a much larger, much more dangerous predator lurking quietly in the depths, just watching them and waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
And that predator was Porsche. This is where the story takes its most incredible twist. The company that makes the iconic 911 sports car, a company you associate with amazing engineering, was about to become the main player in one of the most ruthless financial moves in history.
So just look at this comparison for a second. Porsche was a tiny company next to the behemoth that was Volkswagen. I mean, VW made 6 million cars a year. Porsche made just 100,000. But what Porsche lacked in size, it more than made up for in pure profitability. They were so efficient and their margins were so high that people often joked they were a hedge fund that just happened to make sports cars on the side. And they had a secret, incredibly audacious plan to take over their giant German rival.
And this is the mastermind Wendelin Wiedeking, the CEO of Porsche. For years, he had been executing this secret plan with just surgical precision. He was quietly, methodically buying up Volkswagen stock. Now, the market knew Porsche had a big stake, about 35%, but nobody was really worried. They figured there were still plenty of shares to go around. They had no idea what Wiedeking was really up to.
And this brings us to the exact moment the trap was sprung. As is so often the case in financial warfare, the most devastating moves don't happen in the middle of a crazy trading day. They happen in the quiet moments, over a weekend, when everybody's guard is down.
That moment came on a Sunday afternoon, October 26th. While all the traders were at home, probably watching football, not thinking about the markets, Porsche put out a statement. It was a dry, boring, super technical press release, filled with the kind of financial jargon that's just designed to make your eyes glaze over. It was deliberately made to look like routine paperwork.
But hidden deep inside that dense paperwork was an absolute bombshell.
The press release revealed that Porsche's control over Volkswagen was far, far greater than anyone had ever imagined. They didn't just own the 35% of direct shares that everyone already knew about. Nope. That was just the tip of the iceberg.
So the crucial point is right here on this slide. In addition to their 35% direct stake, Porsche announced they had secretly used these complex financial tools called cash-settled options. It's basically a way to bet on the stock and secure the right to buy it later without actually having to own it yet. This gave them control of another 39% of the company. So let's do the math. 35% plus 39%. That equals 74%. Porsche now secretly controlled nearly 3/4 of Volkswagen.
And this chart, wow, this visualizes the steel jaws of the trap. So, Porsche had 74%. Then you had the German state of Lower Saxony, which owned another 20% as a strategic holding that they would never, ever sell. So, 74 plus 20, that's 94%, which meant the actual amount of Volkswagen shares available for anyone to buy or sell on the open market, what they call the free float, was a tiny, insignificant 6%.
Okay, and this is the exact moment when simple panic turned into pure, absolute terror. Remember the hedge funds? They had shorted 12.8% of the company. But as they all discovered that Sunday, only 6% of the company's shares were actually available to buy. Do you see the problem here? It's a terrifying mathematical impossibility. You have more than twice as many shares that have to be bought back than actually exist on the market. It's like a game of musical chairs where 13 people are desperately trying to sit on only 6 chairs.
The music stopped on Monday morning, the second the Frankfurt Stock Exchange opened. And what happened next was just pure financial violence. Every single short seller on the planet realized, all at the same instant, that they were trapped. There was no way out.
They were legally obligated to buy back VW shares to close out their bets and stop the bleeding. But nobody was selling, Porsche wasn't selling, the government wasn't selling. This sparked the mother of all short squeezes. The price just ripped from €200 to over 1,000 in 2 days as panicked hedge fund managers were begging, offering any price just to get out. The losses were astronomical, estimated at over $30 billion. But this wasn't just numbers on a screen. The human cost was tragically real. Adolf Merkel, one of Germany's richest industrialists, had bet huge against VW. His whole empire collapsed, and a few weeks later, he took his own life.
And on the other side of this whole historic trade, who was selling shares to all the desperate short sellers at the absolute peak of the price at €1,000 a share? You guessed it, Porsche. They had orchestrated the entire event, and they cashed in, making billions of dollars in pure profit in about 48 hours.
The squeeze was so violent, it actually threatened to crash the entire German market.
So under immense pressure from regulators and facing the risk of this systemic collapse, Porsche finally decided to strategically release some of their shares to let the short sellers out of the trap. The second they did, the price just crashed back down to earth. The greatest squeeze in history was over.
But there's one last incredible, ironic twist to this whole story. In their ambition to take over VW, Porsche had taken on a massive amount of debt. And the 2008 financial crisis was just too strong, even for them. They had won the battle in spectacular fashion, but ultimately they lost the war. They'd overextended themselves, and a few years later, in a complete reversal, the giant Volkswagen ended up buying the much smaller Porsche.
So, what's the lesson from this incredible week? It's perfectly summed up by this famous quote. The hedge funds were fundamentally right. VW was an inefficient company struggling in a recession. But being right on the fundamentals doesn't matter one bit if you get the mechanics of the game wrong. They assumed the market was a level playing field. It wasn't. They analyzed the company, but they completely failed to analyze the other players at the table.
And this brings us right to our final takeaway. The hedge funds just didn't realize that somebody else had rigged the whole game board while they weren't looking. It's a powerful reminder to never, ever assume you understand the whole picture or that you know who is holding all the cards. So the question I want to leave you with is this. In whatever you're doing, in your career, in your investments, do you really know who's holding the cards in your game?